Okay, good morning. Let's get started with Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7. We're going to start into the visions and dreams part of Daniel. A couple of things by way of introduction while you're turning over to Daniel 7. Daniel is probably around 60 to 70 years old. We're going back in time. We're leaving the chronological order of things. We're going back to the first year of Belshazzar's reign. So it's also, we'll recognize that this is written in third person, whereas the rest of the book had been written in first person. Now we're going to a third person. Probably, my guess would be, is that Daniel is using an amanuensis, like a secretary, someone else to write things down for him. I could be wrong on that. And in this vision, in chapter 7, we're going to notice that this vision is very similar to what Nebuchadnezzar's dream he had with the statue. Remember the statue with the gold head, the arms and chest of silver, the loins and thighs of bronze, iron legs with iron mixed with clay feet. We're going to see some similarities to this. Now, studying this chapter, I am approaching this like this. In the past years, I've kind of rested on the shoulders of others to help me. So I'm trying to do this on my own, and I am changing my way of looking at the book, and you'll see why. But this is the rules, general rules I'm applying for myself. Number one, remember that God did not put these chapters here to confuse Daniel or the Jewish readers. It was so that they could understand it. He wanted them to get something from it. So it's not put in a way that they could not figure it out. Also, find the purpose first and then work from there. Why was this given? There is an overarching purpose, and we'll see that actually in two verses. I think it's 17 and 18. Not everything needs a historical connection. Just because there's 3 bones or 10 horns or whatever it might be, doesn't mean it has to have an historical connection. And then Numbers had symbolic meaning to the Jews. Doesn't mean that's going to be the case in every single time, but these are things I want to remember as we try to look at how the readers of Daniel's letter interpreted this and read this and saw this. And I think it's not just for them, but for us as well. Here's how I'm going to break down the letter. You got the background, verse 1, the vision, the beginning of the vision. I should have wrote that as the 4 beasts. The Ancient of Days reigns, the Son of Man's presented, then the vision is interpreted, and Daniel's reaction at the very end. So you can see it's 28 verses. It's a very short chapter, but it has a lot of information in there for us to look at and to think about. Now, if you look down, I think it's 17 and 18. 17 and 18. This is how I think we should view the whole chapter. When Daniel asks the man standing by, more than likely an angel, about what these things mean, his first response was simply this: "These great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings who will arise from the earth. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, for all ages to come." Period. That's the meaning. That's the gist of what he wants us to see and understand. Now, there's more details to that. Daniel's going to look for it, and it'll be given to him that we can glean from this as well. But we're going to approach from that macro look. That's the purpose of the chapter. So let's start with verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his mind as he lay on his bed. Then he wrote the dream down and related the following summary of it. Daniel said, "I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea." So "I was looking" is a common phrase he's going to use all throughout the chapter. And it seems to signify whenever he's intently looking at something or a change is about to come in the vision. And in this case, he's looking, it's by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. So the four winds of heaven, what does that make you think of? Some sort of divine intervention. God is doing something. The four winds, the four corners of the earth, but it's from heaven, and he's going to stir up the great sea. In this case, that's the Mediterranean Sea, more than likely. And so God is doing something to intervene. It's probably through providence to bring up these kingdoms, these kings. And as we will see, these are very much similar to the ones from the statue, the kingdoms of Babylon, the Medo-Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans. And so God's in control here, isn't he? He is the one that's bringing these up and bringing these things about. And he's stirring up the great sea. And four great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind also was given to it. So there's that phrase again, I kept looking. So he sees this lion, it's got the wings like an eagle. And when he says, I kept looking, the way I picture that is that he's in the dream, he's watching, he sees the first animal, and it's, I don't know, walking around or something's going on. And so he just keeps looking, waiting, I guess, for something to happen or examining. So I think a little bit of time passes before the next part of the vision occurred. The wings were plucked, it was lifted up from the ground, and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind was also given to it. If this is Babylon, how would you interpret that? What do you think that might mean? Because we're not given directly the interpretation, but what do you think that might mean?
Referring to when Nebuchadnezzar had the mind of a beast.
Okay, had the...
Out of that.
You know, and that's always my first thought, because that seems to fit. We know that happens to him. My only hang up with that in my mind is that it comes up, it is a beast that's coming up out of the water. Of course, it's a vision, and then it's made to be like a man, almost like it's twisted around. Rather than a man being made like a beast, it's a beast being made like a man. So I guess that could be, but it is significant. Unlike the others, this one has something that's being made more like human, rather than just continuing to be a beast that would go around ravaging the world. And my other possible thought on this is that Nebuchadnezzar, of all the kings and kingdoms, is the only one who came to his senses the most and turned more toward God, of being more human-like, and I guess maybe you could say compassionate as compared to a beast to the rest of the world, unlike the others who we don't see that happening with. I don't know, but that's, again, it's not an interpretation that's given to us, so we're left to speculate on things of this nature. Well, his conquest ended. I think that could be associated to his becoming proud, and he's no longer going about taking over the world. Or it could be the death of Nebuchadnezzar, and the power of the empire fades away. I don't know. Again, we're not told on these things, but we are shown a beast. I think the wings is just there to show that it is a great beast rather than just a beast. And so there's something significant about it. Babylon was significant. It was an empire unlike any other in the way it rose up and dominated, just like with all four of these. There are things that occurred with these empires that you'd never seen prior to them, so they're pretty significant. And so we see that happening. Then, verse 5, behold another beast, a second one resembling a bear. And it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, arise, devour much meat. But that's all we're told. So I'm assuming that this is the Medo-Persian Empire. You open up commentators, and they want to assign something to the 3 ribs. Typically, they'll say it's Libya, Babylon, and Egypt, those 3 nations that they conquer. I don't think so. I think it just denotes power, is all it's showing there. Those 3 ribs are the power. Some say that it's 3 representative of the divine nature, that God has given them the ability to do these things. I think it's just a representation of power and not necessarily anything of great significance. We'll see the number 3 come up again later on with the 3 horns being plucked from the fourth beast. And I'll get more into what I'm thinking on that there. But any thoughts on the bear? Why is he raised up on one side? Is that sideways or front? Probably front. You think sideways? I noticed a lot of photos when I was looking online had him, with his one back leg, one front leg raised up. But I've always imagined him with raised up like a bear would. His front is raised up. I don't know what to think about that because there's Medo-Persian. Could have. So maybe it's sideways.
Sideways makes more sense if it's on one side or the other.
Okay. But to what significance? Has that had something to do with being the Medes and the Persians?
I'm not paying for this, you are.
Oh. Well, my paid analysis says we're not given the interpretation. We're left to speculate. And the only thing I could say is it has something to do with the Medo-Persian Empire. But I don't think it's something that we need to know. If it were, then the angel would have told Daniel. It would have been written down for us to see. It is not of great significance for us. Could there be something there that ties it into the Medo-Persian Empire? Probably, but that's not the point, I think, that of the chapter. We'll see that here later on. Right. Okay, so you're talking about, let's hold that till next week. Okay. Yeah, I want to get through this chapter. But yes, you're right. But I want us to see what Daniel is seeing. And so then verse 6, after this I kept looking, and behold, another one like a leopard, which had on his back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. This one's a lot easier, right? So it had on its back 4 wings of a bird, and beast had 4 heads. What does that signify? For this would be the Greek Empire. The 4 generals. And it had 4 wings because how quickly did Alexander take the world? Fast. By the time he was 32, he had almost conquered everything, and dominion was given to it because he pretty much conquered everywhere he went. He could not be stopped. He was fast like a leopard with 4 wings. Could you imagine a leopard with 4 wings? Terrifying. And so that's what he's seeing here. And of course, the 4 heads, 4 wings signified the 4 generals that came after him. After this, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and it was different from all the beasts that went before it, and it had 10 horns. While I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. Okay, so we're going to dive deeper into that later, but let's just hit on this. What is different between this beast and the first 3? No specific animal given. It's different, so different from all the others. Daniel doesn't even know what to call it. What is it? That's why I went with this picture, because in the back, all you see is this shadow of something, some beast, and it's great. I like that one. Everyone else always does a dragon, but I like that one. So he sees it, and it's great, and it's terrifying, and it crushes everything. 10 horns do not grow up out of it, does it? They're just there already. They're already there. And then a little horn pops up, and it plucks out 3 horns, and it has great boast, and it has eyes like a man. Again, on that part we'll get into later, but I want to hit on the significance of the 10. Later on, the angels say these represent 10 kings. In the Aramaic, that can be kings or kingdoms. Depending on the translation you're using, it could say kings or kingdoms. A king signifies a kingdom. When we talk about the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the first king that comes to your mind is who? Nebuchadnezzar, because we even apply him to the lion's den sometimes when that was Darius. But Nebuchadnezzar comes to mind. When you think of the Medo-Persian Empire, what king comes to mind? Cyrus. When we think of the Greek Empire, what king comes to mind? Alexander the Great. When the Roman Empire is mentioned, what Caesar comes to mind? Who? Okay, that is true. I didn't know. I figured we would say Augustus. For most people, it's Julius Caesar. All those who started the kingdom, who got it going, or the empire. And I think that's what's being said here. As for the 10, I found it hard-pressed to find one commentator who would not try to assign a name of a king or a kingdom to every one of these. I don't think that's what we should be doing. I even saw one commentator who arbitrarily plucked out all throughout history different names, from Bulgaria to Germany and others. He assigned all those, and I thought, why? Why not those other ones? I don't know why his purpose was, because I stopped reading. Here's how I view that. The number 10 is symbolic for the Jews, meaning what? Complete. Rome completely controlled the world. It held all the kingdoms under its banner. It did whatever it wanted to do. It crushed them, and it devoured them. So it had hold of it. So it was more complete, I think. Why are you smiling?
China would probably have something to say about that.
That's true.
And all those kingdoms in Africa and all of those places in North America, the Maya, the Aztecs,
Uh-huh.
we're very Western-centric. The Western world, yes, but not everything in the world.
As far as the known world and the empires at that time, known to them, they controlled it. Anyone who wanted to do anything went through Rome. They were powerful. And how powerful were they? They were unlike any other empire ever brought forth. They had the first trained, paid military. All the other militaries, how were they paid? I don't know if you know, but how were the other militaries paid? That's right, whatever they could take on the way. The Roman soldiers were not allowed to do that. They were paid, trained. They received their armor and their armaments from Rome rather than bringing their own. They had a dress code, and they were a standing, ready-to-go army year-round. It was not a militia. It was not, conscriptions. They were powerful. That's why when they started this, they couldn't be stopped. They were so well trained. And so they went through and was easily just taking over everything, trouncing it. And it was a complete takeover. Maybe I shouldn't say over the entire known world, but as far as that area, they controlled it. It was controlled. But then a small horn comes up and it plucks out 3 kingdoms. I view that as having an influence and control over 1/3 of the world, with the great boasting and terror that it brought. And it started under the Roman Empire. So what could this little horn that appeared larger, as we'll see later on, what could that be? Well, let's keep reading, because when we get to the interpretation, that'll help us. So all this is happening as he sees it coming up out of the Mediterranean, out of the Great Sea. And then verse 9, I kept looking. So that signifies a change in the vision. Until thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His vesture was like white snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was ablaze with flames. Its wheels were a burning fire. A river of fire was flowing, and coming out from before him, thousands upon thousands were attending him, and myriads upon myriads were standing before him. The court sat, and the books were opened. Who is the Ancient of Days? I would say God. I say this is a vision of God sitting on his throne, and just like with any kingly court, he has those attending him. And how many are attending him? more than could be counted. Thousands upon thousands, myriads upon myriads. I saw one translation said 10,000 times 10,000. I don't know if that, I didn't look that up to see if that was accurate, but it is a large number. And then he sits, or they all sit, they sit down, the books are open. Court is coming. It's time to prosecute, it sounds like, doesn't it? He's going to make judgments upon the world. So the first part of this vision, you're looking at it, does it look hopeless with these beasts coming up out of the sea? Does it look hopeless? Could you defeat these things and defeat Rome? It doesn't look like. And then this horn boasting in things that the power that it seemed to have, it seemed hopeless. But who's sitting on the throne? God is. And he's watching. Verse 11, then I kept looking. Here's another change. Because of the sound of the boastful words which the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain, and its body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted to them for an appointed time. The only thing I want to point out on this at this moment was that the difference of what happened to the fourth beast and what happened to the other three beasts. The fourth beast was what? Destroyed and given over to the fire. As for the rest, their dominion was just taken away, but an extension was granted to them for an appointed period. So they were what they had was taken away. They survived for a little while before they went off into obscurity in history. But Rome, or I should say the fourth beast, no, destroyed. What happened to Rome? How was it destroyed?
Split, and then it just kind
It,
of dissolved.
yeah, internally, it started internally. Before Hannibal crossed the mountains, they were struggling. As you read through the Roman history, they struggled with what? Immorality, political upheaval, all kinds of issues. We're not going to get to all of it, but I bring that up because of what's going to be interpreted here in just a moment. I think it's connected. And so again, verse 13, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming, and he came up to the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. Okay, who's that? That's the Christ. That's the Christ. So, verse 15, as for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me, and the visions in my mind kept alarming me. I approached one of those who were standing by and began asking him the exact meaning of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. These great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings who will arise from the earth. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever for all ages to come. They'll go away. The kingdom will last forever. And that's true. We win. That's the point and the purpose. But Daniel desires to know more. So verse 19, then I desire to know the exact meaning of the fourth beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth in iron and its claws of bronze, and which devoured, crushed, and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And the meaning of the 10 horns which were on its head, and the horn which came up, and before which 3 of them fell, namely that horn, which had eyes and a mouth uttering great boast, and which was larger in appearance than its associates. Larger in appearance than its associate because of what it was able to do. Plucked out 3 other kings. But there was no great power there for it, except what God allows. So I kept looking, verse 21. And that horn was waging war with the saints. So here's new information. Was waging war with the saints and overpowering them until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one. And the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. Thus he said, the fourth beast will be a 4th kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. Do you think it devoured the whole earth? I'm pointing out that because you talked about China and Japan and all the others. It's symbolic of what was known. And I think that's the way I interpret the 10 horns. It devoured the whole earth. It was complete in what probably you could say what was assigned to it to do. And so it was different, devoured the whole earth and tread it down and crushed it. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom, 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones and will subdue 3 kings. That's power, right? If you're able to do something of that, like that. He will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One, and he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. But the court will sit for judgment, and his dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever. So let's focus in there for a moment. So this little boastful horn, which has eyes like a man and a mouth uttering great boasts, is going to wear down the saints of the Highest One, and he will intend to make alterations in times and in law. So let's look at that. The word times there is different from the word time, times, and half a time. Different word. And it's speaking of more of, I think the best way to explain it is more of the culture of the times. Okay, some think it's talking about festivals, and it could be. That could be part of the culture. What kind of, for example, for just to harp on the festivals, what kind of festivals of our times do we have in America? Christmas? Independence Day. That's where we celebrate John Wayne, right? And then we have Halloween. We have Easter. We have several of those nature. Okay, laws, and I think the New American Standard is right, keeping it lowercase. It's in general. It's the Mosaic law as well as any laws. But I think ultimately the natural law that you find in every civilized nation when it comes to marriage, in general, what does every nation see as marriage? Husband and wife. What does every nation generally see as gender? Male and female. And murder, wrong. Okay? Stealing, wrong. There's things they know to be wrong. It's the natural order of things. But there's going to come one every once in a while that will rise up and try to make changes and alter these things. And they will take away those things and try to change it about. What could that be? What kind of person wants to change the God-given authority to a government, and as well as the God-given authority to the natural order and laws of things? Who does that, huh? Satan. In this case, I think we can be a little more specific. We look to the New Testament, and it actually says it in our text. It doesn't say Antichrist, but it does say something very similar. In verse 25, he will speak out against the Holy One. What does anti mean? Speak out against. And in this case, who's the Most High? It's God. Speaking against God. And how often do you see a person or a nation rise up in like this? It happens every once in a while. And what do they generally do? We saw it happen with Rome. It gets to a point where they begin to alter things. In the beginning, did Rome try to alter the way people ruled themselves and the way they lived? No, except they say you do all these things, but we reserve the right for certain laws and you pay us taxes. But after a while, a person rose up and changes started to come. It didn't just come from one. It started first with Nero. Diocletian really started to push the changes, and immorality became rampant. They began changing the natural order of things. They began changing how all the festivals work and the way the cultures work in the entire empire. And what started happening to Rome then? It split, and then the downfall began. And so we see the phrase time, times, and half a time. We see it here. We'll see it in another passage in Daniel. We see it over the book of Revelation. I think over there and here, it does mean the same thing. It's a symbolic number. It is not meant to assign an exact time period, but I think it has a dual meaning for us here in the book of Daniel. Number one, and bear with me here, 3.5 years is how most people see this, or 3.5 times, 3.5. So 3.5 plus 3.5 equals 7, which is God's will for man on earth. I see 3.5 as the Old Testament, 3.5 as the New Testament. It's a look at the age, the current age. And I think what it's saying here, my opinion, is that we're looking at the Christian age, and throughout that age, when Christ comes, we are always going to have this, where it looks like someone's going to rise up and they're going to start trying to change things. And they're very boastful, and they seem very powerful. And I see that as far as the dual meaning for the boastful one, he's got a time, times, and half a time. For a time, you see him rising up. And then for a times, too, you see they're looking very successful. And I see as the half a time is their fall. And I think the way I view this is God is sitting in judgment. He's watching. He knows when these things occur, and judgment will come upon them. He'll let them do their thing for a while, but they will always come to an end, and the saints will overcome. However, as it says, he'll wear down the saints of the highest one, and will tend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. Yes?
Saints in the Old Testament mean the same thing in the New Testament?
Saints just means holy ones. So yes, that anybody who could be the children of God. And at those times, those who are not strong in their faith, they'll fall away. But those who rise up and are boastful always come to an end, because God will judge them now in this time and bring it to an end. And when they're gone, the saints go marching on, right? That's the way I see it. I could be wrong, that's my opinion, but I think that's what we're supposed to see in this chapter, that things will always look at times hopeless for us in this world, like the world's winning, but God's on his throne, he's in charge. Hold fast and keep moving forward. Keep focused on him above. He's on the throne. We will always have these. And when you look at history, we can see it every time. They will rise up, they'll try to make changes, and then they fall. We see the same thing going in our country. As people try to make changes, it looks like they're going to win. God will bring judgment, whether it's on the whole nation or those groups, I don't know. But I do know one thing, God's in control, we will win. We just need to do what? Hold fast. All right, feel free to poke holes in my theory. I'm willing to be challenged. It's my thoughts. I've gleaned some of this from Leopold, a commentator from 1901, and Guy Orbison as well. Okay. But that's the way I see it. I know in the past, I tried to do what many commentators do, of trying to assign actual kings and kingdoms. I'm trying to stay away from that. I don't think that's what's intended here. I think we're just simply meant to see that God's in control on this first chapter. Things change, and things will get more detailed and complicated as we move forward in this. No comments. Okay. All right. So, the court will sit in judgment, and his dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever, there in verse 26. Does anybody have a different translation there at the end where it says, and destroyed forever at verse 26? Destroy it forever? Okay. The New American Standard has a footnote on the word forever, literally to the end. Destroyed to the end. You say destroyed forever, it almost sounds like, in my mind, that it happens here and he's done for. Destroyed to the end sounds like, to me, that he is destroyed, and it's a continual destruction, and that is brought out in the Aramaic, as that is written in our Bibles, in the manuscripts we have. And so it is a continual destruction. I see this as He will destroy this one, and when the others rise up, he will destroy them as well, and he will keep doing that to the end. God is on the throne. He is engaged. Do you believe God works through providential means in our world today? Providence means through natural means. I say yes. Do you think God puts people on the throne or in office? He does. He's in charge. Whether you like the person in there or not, God put him here. Do you think David and a lot of people in Israel liked having Saul on the throne? God put him there. David saw that, and he left it. He left it that way because vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. He left it to him to take care of it. And we should not be taking care of it on our own. He is there for a reason. That's right. David wouldn't kill him. He even felt bad when he cut off a piece of his robe, and he felt bad. Good for him. Could I do that? I don't know. Probably not. I know my heart and attitude in those things. I'd have a hard time not taking him out, thinking I was justified, but I would not be, because vengeance is the Lord's. And so I see here in verse 26 that this boastful horn, with the way it's destroyed to the end, is something that's going to continue to crop up. And I kind of see is that we're always going to have these troubles. We're always going to have issues. And it's always going to seem hopeless. Oh, they're altering the laws. They're altering our traditions. Ultimately, they will lose. They are only given a time, a times, and a half a time. And then they will crush. They will go down. And God will be here till the end of the age watching over us. Does God take care of the birds of the air and the flowers of the field? Does he not feed them and clothe them? So he will do for you if what? Seek ye first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. And so Daniel is watching all this. Verse 27, then the sovereignty and the dominion and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the highest one. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions will serve and obey him. At this point, the revelation ended. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts were greatly alarming me, and my face grew pale. But I kept the matter to myself, because he wouldn't share that with Belshazzar. He probably wouldn't understand it at all. That's the way I interpret that. Now, verse 27, premillennialists take that and believe that when Jesus comes the second time, he's going to come to the earth and rule as a king on earth for 1,000 years, and we're going to control it for 1,000 years. That is not what it's saying. What he's talking about is God will bring judgment upon nations that rise up like this boastful horn and bring it to an end, and always provide the saints a place of reprieve where we can worship. At times that will be taken away for a time, times and a half a time, but God is always bringing judgment and always providing a way, giving us opportunity, even in the harshest of times. Look at Afghanistan, in Iran, in Iraq, where there are Christians. They are able to. I think God is providing them opportunities, and they're holding on to it if they hold fast. Same here with our country. He gives us opportunities, and we need to be mindful of looking out for those and holding on to those things. We have great freedom, but that's not always a guarantee, is it? What God does want from us is what? Our faith, our hearts, to trust in him, no matter what might happen out in the world. Well, I think the alarming was the way the beast looked, because he and his people are going to have to live through that. That's all that he recognized, I think, is coming in the future. And so I think he knows that Belshazzar falls under the first beast. He still's got 3 more beasts and a boastful horn to go through, or they do. He's getting old, but he sees what's coming for the people of God. And he's worried that are they going to survive? How many are going to die? How many will have to suffer at the moment? Think of it like your family. You're an old old man, and you have 70 children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and you're given a vision that over the next couple of 100 years, your family is going to have to go through quite a lot of turmoil. They'll survive, but you're going to have a lot are going to die. How distressing would that be? Just like with Abraham was distressed when he found out that his lineage was going to go into captivity in Egypt, but he was told they would come out, God would bring them out, but it still brought distress upon him because of what's going to happen to his people. I see that's happening to Daniel. I think he knows what's coming, and so it brought him distress, knowing that they're going to have to go through so much. They've already went through 70 years, or almost 70 years of captivity, and there's a lot more to go through. It's not over yet. Steve?
What year was this?
This is the first year of Belshazzar. What was that, 559 or 553 is where he began his reign? I have to look that up. The bear.
What position it was in.
Okay.
The end of the verse is arise. If it was on its back legs, why would it need to arise?
Okay, the end of which verse is that? Let me go back up.
5.
And behold, another beast, a second one resembling a bear, and it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth, and thus they said to it, arise, devour much meat. Okay, I'd have to look see what that word arise is. Set up, arise, rise, or set about. I guess before I even looked at that, but I've always kind of thought of the word arise as arising up out of the sea and coming up out of there and take its place on the land and take over Babylon and those other nations.
Okay. To me, the way it's described is, I'm picturing a bear that is full, lying on its side.
Oh, laying on its side? I didn't think of that. Like slumbering? I like that. Like he's on his side slumbering. Okay, yeah. And he's got 3 chewing on a couple of bones there, waiting his turn. I like that, actually. I didn't think about it slumbering. Okay, I'll add that to my notes. Well, that's the 3, 3 times 10 is 30, so you had 3 horns plucked out. Aha. For those online, I'm making fun of those who throw everything they can and making assignments to all these numbers. But yeah, no. I think the horns, the 10, is just symbolic of the whole world. All right, any more comments or questions? All right, I hope that wasn't complicated. I hope that showed that it's not as complicated as it can be seen when you look at commentators, and that there's a point found, and we're going to find that, Lord willing, in each chapter as we continue to work through. Read ahead, study ahead. Have good thoughts. The slumbering bear, I actually like that. He's waiting his turn. I could see that. And then they tell him to arise and devour much meat. And he does. He sure does. All right. That's it. Thank you. Good morning. Open up your Bibles, if you would, to Galatians chapter 1. Galatians chapter 1, we're going to be looking at our passage from there here in just a moment. And while you're turning there, if you have not seen the movie Cast Away with Tom Hanks, but you're watching it soon, you might want to cover your ears. I'm going to give it away, what's going to happen. You may remember in that movie, some people remember it being a little slow, a little boring, not much dialogue. But Tom Hanks plays this fella, Chuck Nolan. He's an executive with FedEx. It's a fast-paced work. They took him on flights all over the world. And he was this mentor, and he demanded that everything must be done on time. Whenever he would travel the world, he wanted to make sure that punctuality was followed in everything. Back home, he left a girlfriend, Kelly, with whom he was in love with, and a family that he hardly saw. But while he was flying somewhere, doing his job, he was on a really loaded down FedEx 747. Of course, it crashed into the Pacific. He was the only survivor and found himself washed up on this uninhabited tiny little island. lone survivor. Little did he know that he would live on that little island for about 4 years. And the changes that occurred with him came slowly, but they ultimately were extensive in his life. He went through great bouts within himself, struggles that would be, we would consider too deep for words. But he eventually came to peace and learned how to live with the bare essentials on this little island. Back home, he was left for dead, or not left for dead, but they'd given him up for dead. They had a funeral to his honor. Life sped along without him, as it does. But he escaped this. It's pretty fascinating, but the good news is he was picked up by a boat. He gets home. After a bittersweet welcome back reception, he discovers his girlfriend Kelly had married another man and had children. They thought he was dead. He discovers that he no longer fits into the fast-paced life he once had. For all of his life, his objective and his focus had been his work. But for the past 4 years on that island, his only purpose had been survival. The changes that transpired within him are radical, and he finds himself, at this point, at the end of the movie, a different man. Much deeper, much more observing, much less demanding. And his transformation occurred in a place of solitude, quietness, and obscurity. The truth is, that's where God does some of the best work, in our lives. When you survey through the scriptures, you see that some of the great men and women of the Bible often find themselves before their calling in periods of solitude, quietness, and obscurity. For example, Moses. Moses was raised in the Pharaoh's house in Egypt. I believe he thought that he was going to be the one who would lead the people out of Egypt, and he was going to do that. When he saw the Egyptian beating on a Hebrew, he killed him. But then he got scared for his life, and he ran away, right? went off to Moab, found himself there a wife, and began to work for his father-in-law, tending the sheep. You could say he was off in obscurity. He thought he was going to be this prominent person upon the stage of life, but it didn't work out the way he thought. He wasn't ready. So he spent 40 years tending those sheep. It wasn't until he was 80 years old that God plucked him out of obscurity and employed his leadership qualities and knowledge of desert survival, you could say. He wasn't ready for leadership, I think, until he experienced God there in the desert. Take David, for example. He also was anointed king at a very young age, but he didn't take the kingship. He wasn't king over the land for quite some time. In fact, he was even chased around the country by King Saul, trying to kill him. But he would not lay a hand on him. And it was during those years of solitude, I think, while he was young and out tending sheep. You remember in the Psalms, you would read about how he would be out there meditating on the Word of God in solitary and quietness, out there in obscurity. In fact, when Samuel came to anoint the new king, he thought the oldest son of Jesse was him. And then the next one, do you have any more sons left? Oh, well, there's one, but he's tending to sheep. Obscurity. He's a nobody. That's when God does his best work. And then, of course, Joseph, right? The favored son of Jacob, of the 12 sons, betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery in Egypt. After faithfully serving Potiphar, his Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him, but he refuses that, so she falsely accuses him. He gets thrown into prison. He felt abused. He felt abandoned. And during those many years of confinement and of slavery, he rises to the point of the most powerful man in Egypt, just under Pharaoh. But look at all that he had to go through first before he came there. I'm convinced that those sustained periods of preparation are what fueled the future effectiveness of each of these servants of God. Through their periods of solitude, of obscurity, each of them learned the value of growing deep in their relationship with the Father. They likely thought they could be God's servants at certain times without going through their prolonged retreats or their preparation. At 40 years of age, Moses, I think, thought he was ready to liberate Israel. I don't know about David, but I'm sure David had a lot of things in his mind of what might occur or what might happen, but it didn't play out the way he thought. And I know it didn't play out the way Joseph thought things would play out when he had his dream that all the stars, the stars and the sun and the moon would bow down to him. But it didn't turn out the way I'm sure he thought it would turn out. But it did, through God's providential hand. Our problem is that we are blinded to ourselves and our inadequacies. We often see ourselves as resourceful, talented, articulate, responsible, efficient. Maybe we see ourselves as ready to accomplish what is before us. So why should we, you and I, why should we pause? Why should we take a break to be with God? Why should we get more training and schooling? We think we're ready. Do you ever feel like you're ready? Man, I've done a lot in my life. I remember when I was in my 20s and I got out there on my own. I thought, boy, am I ready. I know everything. I went to Sunset School of Preaching, and as I was going through there, I did think for a while that, you know what, I'm ready, Jenny. Let's put the resumes out there. Let's start preaching and see if I can find a job. And as I was going around interviewing and seeing congregations and seeing how things were playing out, I started to feel extremely inadequate. I needed more training, so I went to Guy Orbison, and he said, you're a lost cause, but I'll try. But here I am, and I'm still striving for that I'm ready moment, because I just want to know the truth. Do you ever find yourself there where you feel like you're ready, and then when you jump in, it just doesn't work out? So with all this in mind, I want us to turn our attention to the story of Saul of Tarsus. In our last lesson from this series on Paul, Follow Me as I Follow Christ, we witnessed the turning point in his life. We watched him standing proudly in his Jewish tradition. We watched him persecuting followers of Christ. And then he had that march up there to the city of Damascus, right, to persecute more Christians. And God interrupted the journey by knocking him to the ground and removing his sight. And for the first time, I think, in his adult life, he found himself totally dependent. He had to be led by the hand to Damascus, and there he had to wait for God's further instructions. In less than a week, God had transformed Saul from a vicious, Christian-hating murderer into a passionate believer and preacher for Christ. Was Saul ready at that point to become the Apostle Paul, or did he need time of preparation? So let's investigate what happened in his life. So we returned here to the letter of Galatians to learn something of that period. Look there in chapter 1, verse 10. Paul writes, For am I now seeking the favor of men or of God? Or am I now striving to please men? If I were still trying to please men, I would not be a bondservant of Christ. Did you notice that? If I were still trying to please men. And that insinuates that there was a time when Paul was striving to please men, not God. Now, I'm sure at the time he thought, and he said that he had a clear conscience. At the time, he thought he was pleasing God, but he was not. He was trying to please men. He just didn't realize that. A large part of what had driven him earlier in life was, I think, that affirming nod of the Sanhedrin, that supreme court of the Jewish people. He had lived, I think, for their approval. They had certainly been impressed and pleased with Paul's efforts to eradicate the followers of Christ. But as we continue reading there in Galatians 1, look at verse 11. He writes, For I would have you know, brethren, that the gospel which was preached by me is not according to man. For I neither received it from man, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ. For you have heard of my former manner of life in Judaism, how I used to persecute the church of God beyond measure and try to destroy it. And I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries among my countrymen, being more extremely zealous for my ancestral traditions. But when God, who had set me apart even from my mother's womb, and called me through his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son in me, so that I might preach him among the Gentiles. I did not immediately consult with flesh and blood, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me, but I went away to Arabia and returned once more to Damascus. Then 3 years later, I went up to Jerusalem to become acquainted with Cephas, and stayed with him 15 days. But I did not see any other of the apostles except James, the Lord's brother. Now, in what I am writing to you, I assure you before God that I am not lying. So Paul is reminding us of his up-and-coming status under the Jewish tradition. He was climbing faster than anyone, and everybody in his mind better stay out of his way because he was on a mission to rise up in the ranks. But God brought that climb to an end, didn't he, when he knocked him off that ladder into the ground and set him apart to preach the very gospel that he had tried to silence. Paul deliberately mentions two things that he did not do after his conversion. First, he did not immediately consult with flesh and blood, that is, other people. He didn't go searching about Damascus, seeking others to shape his theology by consensus, going around saying, hey, do you believe this? Oh, so do I. Okay, good. What about you? Do you think this way? Because yes. He wasn't looking for that. Nor did he go up and rush to Jerusalem to present himself before the apostles to see if they're all on the same page, did he? He didn't do any of those things. It was important for Paul to emphasize these points. I like what Leon Morris, a commentator, wrote about this. He said, this emphatic disclaimer of any contact with earlier believers and their leaders makes it clear that Paul did not derive his understanding of the Christian message from any who were Christians before him. Specifically, he did not learn from, nor was he commissioned by, those who had been apostles before him. It is of primary importance, he writes, for Paul that he had been directly commissioned by Jesus. So if he didn't consult with other Christians, if he didn't consult with other leaders up there in Jerusalem, where did Paul gain all his insight into the nature of God's call and the reality of the gospel? I believe that he received all of that and much more during his time of solitude, silence, and obscurity. He went away to Arabia. Now, where exactly is Arabia? I didn't put a map up because there's no real good map to show Arabia. But if you know where Israel sits, it's on that right there up against the Mediterranean. Arabia is on the south part of it, almost all the way down to Egypt. And then it extends on the east side of Israel all the way up north of it, further up north. And it's a vast area. And you may remember whenever we talk about Abraham, when Abraham or anyone else from over there in Ur, way over on the east side of things, want to travel to Israel, they go up north all the way around and then down south. Well, why don't they just cut straight across? Because it's a barren wasteland there in Arabia. There's no water. There's nothing there. So they go up, around, and down. That's the only way to get there. That's the easy way to get there. And so he's out there in Arabia. The only people who live out there are the Bedouins and the Essenes. Very nomadic people, very few in number. Not sure if he even met any of them out there, but he might have or could have. But for the most part, it was deserted. So we don't know exactly where he was out there. We also don't really know the why he was out there. Whenever the Bible is silent on a subject, we tend to like to fill those things in. I was talking to Corky about that. We like to know the details or fill in the gaps when they're missing in there. We want to know what's going on. But there are some thoughts about that. Early church fathers believe that Saul traveled to Arabia as a missionary, bringing the gospel to those desert dwellers. I don't know about that, but that's what they think. Some believe that Saul fled to Arabia to protect himself from the Jewish leaders who wanted to silence the testimony of his convert, and certainly that could be a possibility. Others have suggested that Saul needed the same amount of time, 3 years, that the disciples had when learning from Jesus. I don't think that's a bad theory. That's a pretty good one. But the truth is, we don't know. All we know is that Paul says in Galatians 1:18, then 3 years later I went up to Jerusalem to become acquainted with Cephas and stay with him for 15 days. So for perhaps as many as 3 years, Saul lived somewhere in the desert, cut off from his former manner of life, in solitude, quietness, and obscurity. And during that time, I bet you he spent his time thinking, praying, wrestling and listening to God. And if Saul had been addicted to popularity, he lost that urge to pursue it during those years in the desert. If at one time Saul had become enamored with his own spiritual significance, then that self-inflated pride melted away there in the desert. In that escape, one by one, Saul threw those things off. He threw them away. All those, you could say, polished trophies that he had on that proverbial wall in his mind, in his resume of religious credentials, and replaced them with the one thing, the longing to know Christ. Whenever I think about Paul out there in Arabia, I think about the passage in Philippians chapter 3. I'll read it to you. Philippians 3, 7 through 9. He's talking about his how he came to this understanding. He says there, "But whatever things were gained to me, those things I have counted as loss for the sake of Christ." What things were gained to Paul? A lot. A lot was gained for Paul. He was going to really rise up the Jewish ranks. He was going to be on the Sanhedrin. And I think when he went out there, that's where he lost those things. He gave those things up. So he goes on, "But whatever things were gained to me, those things I have counted as loss for the sake of Christ. More than that, I count all things to be lost in view of the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and count them but rubbish, so that I may gain Christ, and may be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own derived from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ, the righteousness which comes from God on the basis of faith." He was going to sit more than likely on the Sanhedrin. That'd be like somebody in our country giving up an opportunity to sit on the Supreme Court of our land, to go and preach the Word of God at a small congregation in the middle of nowhere. And people would probably wonder, why would he do that? Why would Paul do this? He's going to give up all that and join, in their minds, the enemy? What changed? He came to know Christ. These same words, imagine Paul here, that he had been so religious, so busy, so active, so engaged, so advancing, so zealous, but then again wrong too, and all that. But imagine not imagine, but can those words be descriptive of us? Are we busy, engaged, and active, and advancing, and zealous in quite a many things? It's not that we are busy doing all the wrong things, or even terrible few things. We're likely not persecutors or destroyers, but if the truth be known, we may be busy working for God, but we may not really know God. Have you ever found yourself in those situations where you are so busy doing the work, you forget about yourself? This happens to preachers a lot. They get so tied up in all the things that they create for themselves. Looking at myself, me, I like to stay busy. I'm a busy person. And I wrap myself up in so many things. I get so busy, what happens? I lose sight of the goal. I lose sight of what I ought to be doing. Have you ever found yourself in a situation like that where you get so busy and you're just, all you do is like you're going throughout your week, you're like, okay, church, let's get to church. And then after church, we'll do this. And then get to church. Let's go. All right, let's go home. Let's get this done. Next. And it's on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And it's not our intention to forget or subdue the things of God in our lives, but it happens. Because every day, every once in a while, things get a little busier, doesn't it? It gets a little harder. Think about it for a moment like this. Chances are good that your life has grown more complicated than it was 10 years ago, or maybe even 5 years ago. And over time, we tend to collect more and more stuff. We engage in more and more activities. We take on more and more debt. We accept more and more responsibilities. And all of this doesn't necessarily make us unhappy, but it can leave us empty and dry. Do you ever feel like after vacation, you need a vacation? Then this is probably you. Empty and dry. If we hope to grow stronger and deeper, then we need to find a solution to the maddening pace that we find ourselves on. And the good news is that God doesn't require geographical isolation to teach us the lessons learned through solitude. So none of us need to book a flight to Arabia just yet. But I think we can grow deep during these times that we set aside for quietness, soul searching, maybe confessing in our prayers to Him, meditation, our prayer. And I want to share with you 3 strategies that I'm trying to practice. One of the things I used to do, I'd always would come back so recharged. You may remember this, though you who were still here, when I would go help out with workshop in the Word up in Durango, Colorado. I loved doing that. It was a lot of work, but I enjoyed it. I would get there early, set things up out there in the forest and in the woods of that lodge. And I'd be all by myself. I'd go outside after all the work was done. I would sit outside and just listen to the quietness, the running creek if it hadn't frozen over, the wind blowing through the trees. I loved it. And then the study through whatever book we were studying through, and then the fellowship with all these other ministers from all over the country. I lived for it. But then that eventually came to an end. So Guy and I started going to the Teton family encampment. I got to do that for 2 years. That was a great recharge and getaway. There was tackling the text. Well, I talked with Guy just the other day. We're canceling it again this year. Again, not going to happen. I need to find a way to recharge. And so here's what I'm doing. Maybe this will help you too. So the first one, number 1 of the 3, instead of speeding up, slow down, rethink. Imagine Saul's time in Arabia. I doubt he was making a list each day of what to do before sundown. And it's difficult for me to say, don't write a list, because I'm a list guy. I like to make a list. I stop that. I pick a date. I stop. And I use that as an opportunity to think and meditate and dwell on the things of God. I don't picture, Saul, picking up the next bestseller, 6 Fast Steps to Success. I picture him walking slowly. I picture him thinking deeply about his past, about his experience on the Damascus road. I see him waiting upon the Lord for insight and direction. And so I want to encourage us to carve out some time each day, slow down, rest, and reflect on the Lord. We might do it first thing in the morning. We might do it at lunch or right before bed, but we need to do it. I value the time I get. Some of you have commented about how you'll drive by the church building sometimes in the early morning on the way to the airport early, and the light's on at 4:30 or 5 in the morning. That's me. Or I forgot to turn off the light. But usually that's me. I like to get up early. I like the quiet solitude, to rest, to empty my mind and read. It gets me ready for the day. I need that. That's my charge. And so these moments of solitude strengthen our connection with God and put us in a position to receive what He wants us to receive from His Word. David did this, did he not? Meditating on God's Word while he was out there with the sheep. He sat under the stars many a times. And it gave him what he needed. It built him up and deepened his relationship with the Lord. Number 2, instead of talking more, be quiet and listen. We are bombarded with words and sounds everywhere, aren't we? They blare from the radio, the television, our phones, our computers, billboards, web ads, whatever it might be, newspapers. It's everywhere. You can't even get in an elevator without noise. I remember once somebody asked me why I pause so long whenever I say a prayer. And if you know, I know I haven't led many, but when I get here to lead prayer, I'll say, all right, let's bow our heads and pray, and I will pause for a while. I do that because I'm emptying my mind of everything, any distractions, and I hope you are too. I use that silence to quiet myself. And I focus on God. Because when I lead a prayer, I recognize I'm leading us before God. I'm not saying the prayer is for you to hear it. I'm saying the prayer as a memorial and an offering, a prayer up to him. Does silence make you uncomfortable? Sometimes it does, doesn't it? So we have to fill the silence with noise. We recognize that from certain babies in the congregation. They like to fill the silence, don't they? Some do that. And we even do that as adults. Sometimes we don't like the silence, but we need that. The discipline of silence allows us time to think, time to listen, time to talk only when we have something to say that will be a benefit to others who will listen. Silence. Number 3, instead of seeking the spotlight or a place of power, be content to humbly serve behind the scenes. Saul was used to power and control and the spotlight. God took him to the place of obscurity and humility. I don't know what assignments, if any, God had for Saul out there in the desert, but whatever they were, few people would ever know about them. And when we learn to serve in secrecy behind the scenes, then we know that what reward we have, we will receive from the Lord. And what better reward is there than that? Richard Foster wrote this: "Today we have forgotten the importance of this hidden work of God. As a result, we immediately thrust people into notoriety, bestowing on them unbelievable power, and then we wonder why they are corrupted. Unless we are ready for it, power will destroy us." I agree with that. The story of Jesus washing his disciples' feet is a powerful story. Jesus has told us to follow his example, but have we cultivated that kind of serving spirit? Again, Richard Foster, he wrote a book called Celebration of Discipline. He writes, "Superficity is the curse of our age. The doctrine of instant satisfaction is a primary spiritual problem. The desperate need today is not for a greater number of intelligent people or gifted people, but for deep people." I've encouraged us to, if we're not doing already, to get a journal for you guys and a diary for you ladies. Write your thoughts. You've heard Alex come up here and in his lessons. He likes to talk about the history of our country. And those men were deep thinkers. I don't think any of us would deny it. Do you know why? Because we have their letters and their journals. And we know what they wrote because they put their thoughts out. And they had those times of silence where they prayed over and they thought of and they wrote them down. And when you write out your thoughts, you have a whole new way of looking at things. Have you ever been upset with yourself because you had an outburst of anger and said something you knew you should not have said? Oh man, I wish I had thought about that before I said it. Well, imagine if you had written it out first and saw it written out, and you had that forces you to think about it. You know you would not have said it then. It develops a character inside you. It causes you to think. That's something we ought to be doing. A life marked by depth can only be cultivated in protracted periods of time spent in solitude, quietness, and obscurity, away from the hustle and bustle of life. That's hard to do. I know. It's difficult to find that time. I used to find it in different places, but now I got to make it where I can. I look for it in the mornings or maybe at night. If I'm lucky, I will get a day one day, but it hasn't happened yet. But I'm thankful for what I do have, and I look for those opportunities the Lord gives me. And so these 3 things that we've looked at are about today they're just simple disciplines, aren't they? They're not that hard. They'll help us grow deeper. They'll help us grow stronger in the Lord. The call of solitude and silence and service will prepare us to make a difference in the world. It'll get us to be thinkers, to think through situations, to stop and listen. But the difference we make starts by us being different. I hope God is with you and with me in this. I hope that he may cultivate within us a deep knowledge of him and a deep-rooted dependence on him. But you got to find that solitude where there's no distractions, where you can dive deep in God's word. And I hope the Lord forges for us, in us, a character that comes from our time spent with him in that solitude and in that silence and in service. It worked for Moses. It worked for David. It worked for Joseph. It worked for Saul of Tarsus. Do you see it in their lives? And there's many more examples in the Bible where the Lord showed us. How often would Jesus go away to a mountain to pray? Why would he do that? Silence. Quiet. Solitude. No distractions. Away. Just him and the Lord. We need that if we want to grow deeper in the Lord. My goal, one of the things I strive for is to grow in the Lord. Every year, I examine myself. I look at myself. And I try to be as honest with myself as I can about where I was and where I am. And when I see that, well, I did not grow much, or I didn't grow at all this past year or month or what, so I look back and say, what was missing? And almost inevitably, I can tell you what was missing was the time I had carved out for the Lord, that personal time, wasn't there. And I'm not talking about Sundays and Wednesdays. You may be thinking, but Chris, you're the preacher. Your job is to sit in solitude studying, right? You know, there's no, I don't know how to explain it, but there's a difference between preparing lessons and the things I do for the congregation and then my personal time that I give to myself and the Lord. There's a difference. And the same goes for you. Even if you're teaching a class, don't count those as your personal time with the Lord. Carve out that time every day. Even if it has to start off as just 5 minutes. But if you can, grow it to 30 minutes, maybe an hour, if possible. And it will strengthen you spiritually, and you will grow up to be stronger in the Lord. It will bring you a peace of mind that you're longing for. It worked for those in the Bible. Jesus is that example for us, and it's there for you and me as well. But if you're on the outside of Christ, if you have not been part of that, you long for that peace of mind, you long for that deeper knowledge of knowing Christ, knowing the Lord, you don't have to grow to be like Paul to be baptized into Christ. If you know the truth, if you know what is expected, we want to offer you his invitation, the invitation of putting Christ on in baptism, being raised in that new life, and that opportunity to walk with him and have those moments of glory of sitting with the Lord and diving deep in his word. And we offer that invitation to you this morning as we stand and as we sing this song.